The late great trainer Emanuel Steward once said that Wladimir Klitschko is the most talented heavyweight that he's ever worked with. And he's worked with people like Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, Michael Moorer. Actually, he worked with Michael Moorer when Moorer was a light heavyweight. I think he might have still worked with him a little bit when he was a heavyweight, when he first moved up to heavyweight. But still, he's worked with several world heavyweight champions, Emanuel Steward. So he knows what he's talking about when he said that Wladimir Klitschko was the most talented of them all. But at the same time, he said that Wladimir, even though he is the most talented, he don't display that full talent in a professional ring. He said he would do it in sparring, he would do it in the gym, but when it came to actual fights, he would fight within himself. He was hesitant and scared to do certain things in a professional fight that he'd do in the gym. This is what Manny Steward said. This is why Manny Steward used to get so upset and angry with Wladimir Klitschko in the corner and implore him to step on the gas and do things in the ring, which he wasn't doing. I believe, in my humble view, that Manny Steward was the greatest boxing trainer of all time. Certainly there is no boxing trainer that has taken so many fighters from scratch and turned them into world champions as Manny Steward has. And if you don't know about that, do your research. I'm not going to make this a Manny Steward video. I've done Manny Steward videos before. So when he says something, it carries weight for me. I'm not saying everything he says is gospel, but it carries weight, particularly when it's a fighter that he's worked with. So I believe what he says when he says that Klitschko's the most talented heavyweight, more talented than the likes of Lennox Lewis and Holyfield and all those guys. Klitschko is supremely talented, or was supremely talented. Great punching power, one of the best jabs of all time, great balance for a big man. Even though he wasn't a combination puncher, he had quick hand speed with his 1-2 and his jab. Very good technique. His jab and his right hand were very difficult to read because he threw them with such good technique. I mean, you look at the Joshua fight and you'd have to say Klitschko looked like the faster man in there. At least in terms of throwing the straight shots from long range, he was the faster man. Maybe Joshua was the faster man when he puts his shots together in combinations in terms of hooks and uppercuts, punches that Klitschko don't really throw. But certainly from the outside, Klitschko, even at 41 years of age, looked a lot sharper than Joshua. Jab looked better. Straight right hand looked straighter and quicker. So a very talented heavyweight. The one thing that Wladimir Klitschko lacked throughout his professional career, because he's achieved so much. He had that run where he went undefeated for like 10 years after coming back from several losses. But the one thing that he always lacked, or never really displayed in his career, was a true fighting heart. His brother showed it. The other fighters that Manny Steward had worked with, the other heavyweights, they'd showed it in abundance. Holyfield had showed it. Lewis had showed it. Michael Moorer had showed it. But Wladimir, whenever he came up against a difficult situation, he would normally capitulate and crumble. Against Russ Purity, it got tough, Wladimir crumbled. Against Corey Sanders, he got blown out, he crumbled. Against Lamont Brewster, he capitulated and crumbled. After that, when he came back and fought Sam Peter, he did get off the floor several times. But to me, he looked like a scared fighter against Sam Peter. He went down from shots that were not particularly hard shots. They were scuffing shots. And in my view, Klitschko went down more from fear of what might happen than the concussive effects of the punches. So yeah, he did well to survive the Sam Peter fight, the first fight. But that wasn't a guy in there who, in my view, was showing a warrior's heart and a warrior's fighting spirit at all. He was a guy that was wide-eyed and kind of scared and just glad to have gotten through a situation like that. So he'd never really shown fighting heart throughout his career. Even when he went in this long 10-year run. There was a lot of times when I was heavily critical of Wladimir Klitschko because of the amount of fouling that he would do in fights. I mean, you look at the Povetkin fight, people, if you had had competent and trustworthy officials and a trustworthy referee in there, Wladimir Klitschko would have had several points deducted from early on in the fight for the amount of holding and pushing down and leaning on and throwing Povetkin around. He would have had several points deducted. He could have even been disqualified for the amount of excessive holding he did in that fight. I've never seen a heavyweight champion do that much fouling in one fight and not get disqualified. I've never seen it. People want to bring up examples. They're all nonsense. I've been through this with people before. Nonsense. The Povetkin fight was a disgrace, the way Klitschko performed in that ring. Disgraceful. He initiated more clinches than he landed punches. Fact. Fact. There's a video online called Wladimir Klitschko Shocking Tactics. Go look it up and you'll see all the clinches that he initiated in the Povetkin. And they're not just clinches. Not like some fighters back in the days Muhammad Ali used to clinch. Not like that. These weren't just clinches. These were situations where he would clinch and then he would push Povetkin's head down to the point where Klitschko's own feet left the canvas because he was pushing down on Povetkin that hard. Throwing him around the ring like a ragdoll, like it's WWE. That was an extreme example of the kind of fouls that Klitschko used to, initiate in or commit in some of his fights. But he did it in many fights. That was the worst, the best example or worst example, however you want to think of it. But he did it in many, many fights. He relied so much on illegal clinching. And clinching is legal in boxing, but not excessive clinching. And certainly not pushing people down to the point where your feet are leaving the canvas. No, that's illegal. So he used these illegal tactics as an integral part of his strategy for winning the fight. If you took that clinching away from him, he may have lost fights, which he actually won. Yes, he may have lost fights because he was relying so much on the clinch to wear the opponent down and take away the opponent's inside game. And that was something I always found disgusting about Klitschko, is the level that he would go to. And because he was always based in Germany, nothing was ever done about it, or very rarely. I mean, even in the Povetkin fight, which was in Russia, God knows how he managed to get away with all that stuff in Russia. He's not even from Russia. Such is the power of Klitschko in even Eastern Europe, not just Germany, I guess. So I had my issues with him, and I called him out on these things. But I've always said that he was a supremely talented heavyweight, and that's one of the things that frustrated me so much about Klitschko. This guy's so talented. I mean, we eventually saw in the Joshua fight what he can do without having to clinch. He can. He had the physical ability all along to fight his way out. He didn't have to do all this excessive holding. He could have fought his way out. He always had the physical ability to do so. But mentally, he wasn't there yet. It took him a long time to get there mentally. He was always scared. But all along in his professional career, he's been searching for something. I don't know what he's been searching for because I'm not inside the man's head. But he's been searching for something. You don't go on for as long as Klitschko did unless you're still searching for something. And the one thing, as I say, which he never had throughout his career was a true warrior's heart. In the Joshua fight, he finally found his warrior's heart. When he got dropped by Joshua in the 5th round, he didn't have that frightened look on his face that he had when he got dropped by Corey Sanders. He didn't have that panicked expression on his face that he had on his face when he lost to Lamont Brewster, or when he lost to Ross Purity, or when he got dropped by Sam Peter. He didn't have that frightened look on his face. He climbed off the canvas against Joshua with a steely determination in his eyes, with a defiance. He finally found his fighting heart. It took all these years of professional boxing for him to find it. And that may be the reason why he's actually chosen to retire. Because that was the one box that Wladimir Klitschko, as talented as he is as a heavyweight, That's the one box that he never managed to tick. Now he's managed to tick it. Maybe he feels like there's nothing left to prove. Mission accomplished. All boxes ticked successfully. Took a long time for him to tick that last box, but he got there in the end. He proved that somewhere in him, he did have a warrior's spirit. Or at least a semblance of a warrior's spirit. He brought it out in the Joshua fight. And that's why he was so proud of his performance. That's why his brother Vitaly said, I'm proud of my brother the way he fought here against Joshua. Because Vitaly always had the warrior's spirit. He showed that against Lennox Lewis. But his brother Wladimir had never shown it. So even though Wladimir lost, Vitaly was proud of him because he showed that warrior spirit that he'd never shown before. Finally found it. And a part of him maybe inside felt complete. Even though he'd lost, he'd redeemed himself in the eyes of the fans. He'd shown the fans, look, I got heart too. I can be in a war. I can climb off the canvas and come back and put the other guy on the floor in the next round. You know? So, as far as Wladimir Klitschko's legacy, how he'll be remembered, well, he is the second longest reigning heavyweight champion of all time behind Joe Louis. I believe the second longest. I think, yeah, pretty sure the second longest or third longest. He had a great second title reign, dominant, a consummate professional in terms of keeping himself in shape. You know, I'm not happy about some of the tactics that he used in the ring. I'm also not happy about the way that he treated his opponents. Him and his brother had a stranglehold over the division, and they would make opponents sign slave contracts. They would pull all types of shenanigans, particularly Wladimir, with spongy canvases, making the opponent wear deliberately uncomfortable gloves, you know, getting away with all types of fouls. They would pull all types of shenanigans and dirty tactics inside and outside the ring. I mean, the contracts that they made these opponents sign were situations where if the opponent beat Wladimir, he's got to have a rematch. That's normal. That's standard. But then if he beat Wladimir in the rematch, he'd then be obligated to fight Vitaly. These are the kind of contracts they had, on top of all the spongy canvas and all the other funny business they had in their contracts. I've never seen that level of control freakish behavior with any other fighter before. That's what Wladimir had. So I took issue with that kind of thing. But I never took issue with his talent. I always felt Wladimir is one of the most talented heavyweights I've ever seen, especially for his size. Very talented. He did have a great run. In terms of his best wins, you'd have to say Povetkin. On paper is one of his best wins, even though the performance was disgraceful. If you're just looking on paper, Povetkin was one of his best wins. David Haye, and maybe Kubrat Pulev. None of those guys are going to go down as all-time great heavyweights. So if you want to assess his resume and compare it to Lennox Lewis or Muhammad Ali or any of these other guys, it might not stack up next to theirs in terms of the names on it, because he hasn't beaten guys as good as those guys beat. But then again, you can only beat who's around during your era. And during Klitschko's era, there weren't any other all-time greats other than his brother, and he was never going to fight his brother. So there were no Hall of Fame type fighters that he was going to be able to fight. At least not guys who were in their primes. So he just beat whoever was in front of him at the time. You can't really do no more than that. And it has to be said, there's a lot of people who are big Mike Tyson fans and they swear blind that Tyson is an all-time great. Maybe he is. But they swear blind that he's the greatest heavyweight of all time. Name me an all-time great that Mike Tyson actually beat. I'm waiting. Silence. Crickets. Other than Larry Holmes. Okay, he beat Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes was way past it. 38 years old. Coming off a 2-year layoff. 2.5-year layoff. Hardly had any time to train. You know, it's not like when he beat Ray Mercer a couple years later. He had 7 or 8 fights leading up to the Mercer fight. He was a lot sharper. Against Tyson, Don King came to his house with a sack of money when he'd been sitting on the couch, putting on weight, and said, yo, you're fighting Tyson. take the money if you want to fight Tyson. And he hardly had any time to train. But anyway, not to get sidetracked, you take Larry Holmes out of the equation, who was way past it. Tyson never beat no all-time greats. Lennox Lewis did. Lewis beat Holyfield. Lewis beat Tyson. Tyson was way past his best, to be fair, when Lewis fought him. But he did beat Holyfield when Holyfield was champion. That's an all-time great. He did beat Klitschko. When Lewis was past his best and Klitschko was in his prime, Vitaly Klitschko, Lewis beat him. So you look at Lewis's resume, in terms of the names on there, they're better than the names Vladimir beat. Same with Holyfield. He's got names on his resume that are better than the names that Vladimir beat. But again, to a certain extent, that's not Vladimir's fault, because he wasn't around in a particularly strong era. Like Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson, during the 80s, it wasn't a strong era for the heavyweight division. So Tyson just beat the guys who were there, but there wasn't anybody there that was particularly good. So that is what that is. So, I mean, you can look at Vladimir's career and you can compare him to the likes of Joe Louis, because Joe Louis as well, yeah, he beat good fighters, but nobody that's regarded as an all-time great. So how do you assess Joe Louis's career? You know, the longest reigning heavyweight champion of all time, but what was the quality of opposition like? Joe Louis went for a phase in his career where he had something which the press termed the bum of the month club, where he was just taking on stiffs. So I guess you could, as I say, compare Vladimir to Joe Louis in that sense. So those are my thoughts on Wladimir Klitschko, the fighter. Very talented. He eventually found his fighting heart at the end and put in a gallant and brave, warrior-like display against Joshua, even though he lost. The rest of his career, for me, unfulfilled potential. A guy who had the physical ability to have performed and to have been much greater than he turned out to be, because he didn't have the mental ability to do it in terms of the bravery, the courage that it takes to make the most out of his physical ability. He found it finally against Joshua. But for me, that's a little bit too little too late to make up for some of the stuff that went before. Again, not saying he weren't a great champion, not saying he ain't an all-time great. I think he is an all-time great. But as I always say, no fighter is below praise and no fighter is above criticism as far as I'm concerned. So those are my thoughts, my random thoughts about Wladimir Klitschko in retirement. Mixed feelings, really. Mixed feelings, because I keep reiterating, I always admired his ability, his physical ability, but his behavior left a sour taste in the mouth with me a lot of the time. You know, could have been greater than he was. If he'd had Vitaly Klitschko's heart, Vladimir would have been on another level to anything that we saw him achieve in his professional career. If only he had his brother's heart. Never mind his brother's chin. If he had his brother's chin as well, wow, we might be talking about the greatest heavyweight of all time. But just if he had Vitaly's heart alone, he would have been a next level to what he was, in my view, you know. Anyway, let me know your views on Wladimir Klitschko in the comment section below. I'm sure some of you think I'm being too harsh on the man. I don't see how, because all the criticisms I've made of Wladimir are fair criticisms. He did foul to a ridiculous extent in a lot of his fights, to the point where the fouling was an integral part of his winning strategy. If it's that integral, if it's that important for him to foul, what happens when you take the fouling away? Because he's desperate to foul, so he must feel that without that fouling, there's a good chance he could lose. You know? So how great would he have been if you took the fouling away? These are the questions people have to ask themselves. So, yeah, my critiques of him are fair critiques. And again, some Klitschko fans or some people that are just very sentimental are going to say, you're being harsh here, Hat Man. But that's just the way I feel. If you feel like I'm being harsh, it's all good. Let me know. If you agree with me, let me know. If you're indifferent, let me know too. As long as we're all respectful, then it's all good. All right? It's Hat Man, I'm out.